Hey, how's it going? I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know the Many Saints of Newark. Wait, it's no perfect movie? Get the fuck out of here. I don't know why, Italian accents are just the best to do. But in any case, The Many Saints of Newark, of course, covers the teenage years of Tony Soprano, played by Michael Gandolfini during the early 1970s. But at its core, the movie is truly about his uncle, Chrissy's dad, Dickie Moltisanti, played by Alessandro Nivola, and how the relationship between his entire family becomes tested once they go to war with an old associate, played by Leslie Odom Jr. Now, like a lot of people, I think The Sopranos is one of the best shows to have ever existed, in my humble opinion. So, when I found out that they were going to make a prequel to this, I was cautiously optimistic because David Chase, the creator of the show, was a writer and producer, and it was directed by Alan Taylor, who, in my opinion, made some of the best episodes of the entire show. I didn't buy into the fact that Michael Gandolfini was going to be the star of the movie like the marketing would suggest you to do, seeing as how there were so many actors who were higher listed in the cast as opposed to him. And considering he's the son and the main character of the show, you'd think that if he were the star, he would have been top bill. But in any case, I obviously wanted to see how he could live up to his father's legacy, the relationship between him and Chrissy's dad, which never, I think, got explained on the show maybe once or twice tops. But I also got a little bit worried when the reviews, as decent as they were, kept saying how there were too many plot points, characters were being underutilized, and I can't remember what the other. Yeah, that's right. That a lot of people thought that it was better suited to be a miniseries as opposed to a movie, which those criticisms can apply to just about any gangster movie in existence. I love the fact that people are just starting to recognize these tropes now, but not gonna lie, even if I had never seen the show, I truly believe that I would have had an equal amount of a blast as I did watching The Many Saints of Newark twice in theaters. First time I went by myself just to see if my dad would hopefully enjoy it a little bit, and then the second time I did take him. And needless to say, I liked it more than he did, but I saw that coming a mile away. Now, as I said before, this was directed by Alan Taylor, who usually is pretty below average when it comes to directing movies, but his experience on the show serves him so nicely here because the visual style is old school in the best possible way, where even the most mundane of scenes feel meticulously plotted out so that the camera work and the pacing of the editing could move forward the story equally, if not more so, than the dialogue. And one thing that I noticed the first time around was that almost every conversation was filmed in what was called a two-shot camera angle, where every character who was in the conversation was within the frame at the exact same time. So our eyes are constantly moving back and forth between one character's action and another's reaction. It creates a lot more tension as opposed to just cutting back and forth, and it makes you feel like characters are boxed in, especially whenever they're having an argument. Or certain scenes, once the argument is over, will be completed with a character standing in what's called a frame within a frame, like the hallway of a door or being separated by a wall that makes the characters feel boxed in based on the circumstances they're experiencing. And something that, on second viewing, I couldn't believe I didn't notice was that the color blue was often used symbolically to represent the feeling of betrayal or remorse within the characters. Ray Liotta, for instance, spends the entire movie in a blue prison jumpsuit. So tons of regret there. And in case that was an obvious example, there's this one parent-teacher meeting where Liv has small doses of blue on her dress, and when she hears this memory Tony recalls of her, she starts to actually feel regret, that you actually start to feel sympathetic towards Livia Soprano. Really think about that. And in regards to the overall scope as a gangster movie, it feels incredibly massive in comparison to the show now that they have more of a budget to film the entire city of Newark, New Jersey in these sweeping wide shots, filming the violence in bigger locations and in a much more cinematic fashion without sacrificing any of the gritty realism or overusing CGI. This is still an incredibly practical movie where whenever people are getting shot at out of the blue, blood squibs are splattering all over the place, real life buildings, windows, and cars are getting demolished left and right, and there are these real life race riots occurring that set the emotional stone for the film that are portrayed in a way that never felt sensational. In fact, Alan Taylor was a history professor before becoming a filmmaker. He had actually accessed certain information about the riots and newspaper clippings that he replicated beat by beat. I'm not entirely sure why they had to show the footage to Leslie Odom before the movie came out. I mean, he was literally in half the scenes featuring riots, so it's not like he didn't know what the footage looked like or how it was going to be edited together. I know this movie went through a lot of editing, and I'll get more into that later on, but that still felt like a publicity stunt as opposed to anything else. But in any case, whenever there was a fight or a death scene, the physical impact was shown often within one take so that you can feel the physical and emotional weight all at once. So whenever someone hits the floor or receives a bullet in the head, that one shot just like gives you a complete jolt and makes you anticipate what might happen next. It was all filmed in steady wide shots, no handheld camera work, no quick cut editing, huge change of pace there. But the thing I appreciated the most about the storytelling was that they didn't fucking spell out everything with narration. The reason I think movies like Goodfellas, Wolf of Wall Street, Irishman are beyond overrated is because as many cinematic techniques as Martin Scorsese puts into those films that do tell the story with pictures, he completely fucks each moment over by spelling it out as if we hadn't literally saw the moment right before our fucking eyes, or if some people find this even worse, whenever they skimp over the most interesting parts of the film with a bland one-liner. This movie, like the show, actually trusts you to put the puzzle pieces together. When Dickie murders someone and dumps their body out during the riots, did you really need a monologue to explain what would happen and what people might have thought happened to him? No! It's incredibly obvious! I hate narration, in case it wasn't obvious, but also, when it comes to foreshadowing certain characters and events that'll happen later on in the TV show, I like that they, for the most part, don't spell it out for anyone who hasn't seen the show before. There's no big monologue about who certain characters are, what their reputation is. There's no over-the-top music to introduce them. If anything, the Easter eggs are actually introduced in a more subtle way where they're inserted within a wide shot, and you have to really look close to catch them. Particularly this one where Tony, as a kid, is watching a crow in a garage. And as I'm saying that, I'm sure somebody's geeking out over it. There are some catchphrases from the show that can be distracting, but for the most part, they still fit the scene and the tone of the characters. And it also ties into one of the themes of the movie where characters develop their personality traits and beliefs from mimicking what their friends and family do, especially and even if they have a rough time with those family members. But like The Sopranos themselves, it truly is the phenomenal casting that makes it worth checking out, and the main character in particular stands out the best. Alessandro Nivola, an actor I had never heard of before, did a fantastic job at getting you to root for someone who does hurt people on a regular basis, but he still shows a decent amount of remorse for it, and wants to compensate by helping out anyone in his family he can, whether it be this Gumar of his, who is played excellently by Michela De Rossi, who has her own ambitions of running a business upon going from Italy to America, and he legitimately wants to support her. That should go to show how much he loves her, especially considering she's a Gumar. I love the fact that a Gumar is a main character, and a fully fleshed out one, too. Or, in Tony's case, whenever he gets into trouble, Dickie will sit him down, have this gentle, friendly father-son dynamic that was so infectious I was smiling every single time, where he compassionately gets him to steer clear of misbehaving, similar to how Tony did the exact same thing with AJ and Meadow in the future. But at the same time, Dickie is still so consumed with rage over the people he hurt because they had betrayed him before, that whenever he's asking for redemption, he's unwilling to even admit these crimes to people who could legitimately keep it a secret, because the people he loved before hurt him so badly that he doesn't know who to trust anymore. In fact, this was an eye-opener. It made me realize that every character in the show and the movie, the one thing they all have in common is that they have this level of intense hatred towards people out of envy or mistrust. And even when they have someone to confide in, they're still so embarrassed and in denial that they let their emotions get the better of them and make some life-threatening decisions, obviously. Ray Liotta was also great as Dickie's own uncle, who has been in jail for so long that when he gets a visitor, he actually doesn't know how to react to it. But his stilted expressions and body language instantly tell us that he's had plenty of time to reflect on his own mistakes and legitimately wants to do what Dickie thinks he's setting out to do with Tony. And upon second viewing, he has these deadpan reactions to the stories Dickie tells of his crimes that made me wonder if he was cryptically letting Dickie know that as he was reenacting what Dickie had described him, that he actually knew what was really going on. Vera Farmiga as Liv was a performance I could not wait to see. I wanted to know if she was that slimy of a bitch back then, and she definitely nailed the ice cold, unimpressed personality. But as I said before, I was not expecting to feel sympathetic towards her whatsoever. Part of the reason they do that is by putting her in the same room as her husband, Johnny Boy. I won't spoil what happens, but it lets you know that Tony, Janice, and that one other sibling no one remembers were the only people she ever had control over and to vent her frustrations out. But even when she finds crystal clear proof that they do in fact love her, whenever they show a slightest bit of constructive criticism, she'll instantly think that their love towards her is bullshit and she'll go on back to being her usual self. And I gotta say, Leslie Odom Jr. surprised me a fair bit too, because I'm just gonna say it, I didn't think he was imposing enough to be a gangster without the hair and makeup on, but I'm happy to say I was proven wrong. He brought the physicality needed towards the role, and if anything, he actually got in the most brutal kills in the film. All of them had my jaw on the floor. I couldn't believe he was that intimidating and that ruthless. And it is true that his arc does stem from how he's treated poorly compared to the rest of the society he's within, but what stood out in his arc was that, as opposed to the other people in the riots who were legitimately fighting against corruption and for equality, at the end of the day, he's still a criminal, and like the Sopranos, he's out for power over others out of pride. So, throughout the entire movie, he has to grapple with the fact that no matter how much he distances himself from them, he still is incredibly similar. Now, some of you are probably going to wonder why I went 12 minutes into this without talking about Michael Gandolfini as Tony Soprano. And that's because even though I didn't buy him being a main character to begin with, I was surprised and slightly disappointed that he wasn't actually in the movie for that long. He truly is a side character whose purpose is to show the amount of influence Dickie had over people. In this case, the fact that Dickie really was the closest thing Tony ever had to a true role model. But at the same time, Gandolfini brought a much more vulnerable and insecure side to the character than I had ever seen from Tony before that, like everybody else, I think James would be proud of Michael. You can see through his withdrawn facial expressions and body posture whenever he's watching his father spend more time doing business than with him, or his mom spending more time with him but in a self-absorbed, manipulative way. You can tell that he doesn't actually want to be a gangster, but the only reason he commits certain crimes like stealing test results is because it's the only way he knows how to go about doing things. If anything, my favorite crime of his he does for absolutely no reason than to impress people, and it showed this playful, innocent side of him that you definitely wish stayed that way. It isn't until Dickie starts to dig himself deeper into his own mess and spends less time with his nephew that Tony once again is left on his own. And even with the lack of eye contact between him and other characters, you can tell that at this point he didn't even know how to hide his own emotions, let alone his misdeeds. Once he gets caught, he'll fess up and beg you to get the punishment over with. And when he's left on his own to commit his own crimes or decide how to live his own life, you can imagine how tragic his path took. It's really hard to describe Tony's arc without spoiling it because he's not really in it that much, but the relationship between him and Dickie is definitely the heart of the film. Now, as for problems, this is a 2-hour gangster movie that should have been 2.5. And you can tell that it was supposed to be because whenever scenes transition from one to another, it always comes out of left field. There isn't that much continuity between them to begin with, and it can feel jarring and rushed, especially during the more laid-back moments when the characters are just sitting around busting each other's balls and making wisecracks, which is one of the best elements of any gangster movie, this one included. You want to have a breather in between the chaos and get to know these characters. You don't always get to know these characters, because the big problem, as everybody has pointed out, is that even though this is about new characters who came before the original crew, the crew is still there, because if they weren't at this point in time, it'd make no sense. But more often than not, Syl, Polly, Puss in particular, they're more like background extras or cameos as opposed to even two-dimensional characters. And even if you never saw the show, it'll disappoint you because they got great actors. Corey Stoll as Uncle June being a smaller role does make sense. There's a lot of scenes of him silently listening to what other people are saying business-wise so he can make a move I wouldn't even dare spoil that has a huge impact on the characters later on in the show. Or John Magaro, I'm not entirely sure. As Syl, completely nailed the over-the-top expressions and accent, particularly in this one monologue that foreshadows his skills as an advisor. But then you have Billy Mcnuggen as Paulie, who I was skeptical about going in because I didn't think he was that great of an actor before, but he was hilarious. He nailed Tony Sirico's cartoony, batshit insane character traits to a T. But his bits are about 5 seconds long tops, and Paulie is hilarious when you give him a minute to give his own opinion on the most random of shit and give everybody else 5 seconds to stare at him like the kooky bastard that he is. And like I said, Puss is a background character who, I'm not kidding when I say this, his only lines, the ones I remember anyways, are just him saying other people's names. That's literally his only purpose. Hell, even Jon Bernthal as Johnny Boy, I was looking forward to seeing the dynamic between father and son, which we barely got in the show, but there are so many scenes where, looking at behind-the-scenes pictures, you can tell we're removed from the final cut. If anything, we get more of his relationship with Uncle June, which was fine, but that's not what we came here to see. And as much as I said that they didn't narrate the movie to death, they do have a character from the show give a speech every half hour from beyond the grave, and it was so pointless that it felt like an afterthought. I don't know if this would have been a better miniseries than a movie, like a lot of people have said, because the core plot points of the film are so streamlined that they can really only be told in a movie. The only reason this would work better as a miniseries was to give the character moments that we love about the show. And if we do get a sequel about Tony in his 20s, which based on HBO Max viewership, we probably will, people are going to like that one more because the crew will be interacting with each other. And they'll get the hilarious and equally tragic moments that we love about the show. It is too short for its own good, but at the same time, I loved Many Saints in Newark. The new characters and themes are incredibly well written. The phenomenal cast takes the challenge of bringing these characters to life once again in a new fashion, and they did a great job, however briefly it was. And the direction evokes the feeling of an old school gangster movie without relying on tired and boring tropes. So for that reason, I'm going to give The Many Saints in Newark a 4 out of 5. Guys, thanks as always for watching.